Hi, and welcome everyone, wherever you are in the world. This is so exciting. I don't think I've hosted an event from so many different places. Welcome to our panel discussion on death care and community for models from around the world. Well, maybe that was auspicious. We're representing Latin and South America, North America, and New Zealand. So quite exciting. This is sponsored by the Dying Well Initiative. It's a part of the Global Wellness Institute, and Dying Well Initiative is one of 30 of their programs. GWI's mission is to empower wellness by educating folks on wellness and preventative health throughout the world. They are well known and respected for their annual trends and reports, and also for uniting the industries in wellness and health around the world. I am the founder and executive director for the nonprofit End of Life Psychedelic Care. However, we're not talking about psychedelics today. I am here in my role as the co-chair for the Dying Well Initiative. I am so pleased, I'm so thrilled to be able to moderate a panel with these extraordinary people who have the vision, the drive, and the passion to build these community programs to support those dying and those also grieving in their respective communities. There are several similarities, as you'll hear, amongst the different programs, but there's also differences because they sought to fill the needs of their specific and respective communities. So our goal here is to share why and how they built these programs, to hear from you, and to hopefully inspire you to continue your own work as well as this work in your own regions. And expand, I should say, the work in your own regions. So we're going to kick off with each panelist telling us a little bit about themselves and how they got into this work, and then we'll delve deeper into their visions and how they basically brought their visions to fruitions. Of course, we all know this is a process. We will leave enough time at the end for questions. And as I said, this event will be recorded and made available to everyone who registered. I am going to turn chat off now, as I would love for us to stay present with the discussion that's happening in the now, and I will turn chat back on when we go to Q&A, although I will ask you at that time to raise your hand to make it much easier for us to manage. So yeah, so let's dive in. I'm going to start with Wilka. So Wilka, tell us about yourself and what led you to this work.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you everyone for being here. So I am Wilka Roig. I am born and raised in Puerto Rico, living in and working in Mexico for the last 15 years. And the work came to me, I think, as a transpersonal psychologist. I was invited into the space of the dying in my community in Mexico, and I discovered that this was something other than a clinical space. And the space and the interactions and the what ended up to me as accompaniment of that and holding of that space, it taught me a lot and guided me into my first labors of service as doula without knowing that that's what that was. I looked at what the communities in Mesoamerica have been doing in recent times with their birthing and dying and learned a little bit from them. And then found out that there is this movement of death doulas or end of life doulas that then led me to connect with that. I've been doing this work for about 10 years. And one of the things that I realized was that this is a work that belongs to the community, that is of the community and for the community. And very, very quickly, I realized that it required a community to hold that kind of space. So I've started a volunteer team in Mexico that now has spread to anyone who has trained with my team to be able to do this work in different parts of Latin America. So the work has expanded in that way. And now we see how this is because of the needs of the communities, this is emerging in other places. So I dedicate to mostly now community outreach programs to find out what are the needs of the communities. And I focus specifically in Latin Americans all over the world and in Latin America. But of course, I also have work everywhere with all people. And to raise awareness about the value and the benefit of working in community to tend to our dying and our grieving. And I am currently in Puerto Rico doing the first month-long death awareness tour around the island, which is, for the same purpose, right? To find out from the people, what are the needs, who's already stepping in to do this work, and how can we best support them so that they can support each other. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Wilka. And I have to say, that's probably a fraction of what she does. And anybody who wants to check her out on Wilka, I mean, on your LinkedIn, or I think at the end, or I will provide everybody's contact info in terms of where they can find out more about you guys. So Brooksy, you're up next. Tell us about yourself.
All right. Thanks, Chris, and thanks everyone for being here. I'm Kathy Brooks Edwards. People call me Brooksy. I live in Pittsburgh, North Carolina. And my work began in the heartbreaking loss when I was 14 of my father, who took his own life. And then my first husband at a young age took his life. And then after that, I kind of muddled my way through life collecting these tools. I went to music school, became a clinical counselor, became a licensed somatic body worker, studied mindfulness movement, Kundalini yoga. And then all of those tools converged together 10 years ago when I was invited by Chris Lukash, who was a North Carolina red wolf biologist. And he had a documentary called Staring Down Fate, where they were following the death of the red wolves here in North Carolina. And Chris had been diagnosed with ALS. And so I came forward with all of my tools, and I supported him and was guided through that year of his dying time by the author and grief advocate Stephen Jenkinson, and met my first death doula that I got to work with, Dr. Kerr out of Canada, and brought those tools of music and touch and community and mindfulness, and I started bringing death to the table. And then a month before we buried him, we buried a 19-year-old community member that unfortunately got looped in the accidental overdose. And then Chris died a month later. And it was all of that that converged me and community members and my partner, Amy Durso, who played music at that time for us. And I then became a death doula and founded Heart to Heart of North Carolina, which is a nonprofit that provides services for individuals, families, communities, and we created a green burial sanctuary at the borough here in order for people to learn about these services and be provided the care that's needed and the education that's needed. And here I am with all of you getting to share all that. So I'm really grateful to be here. That's how I got here. That's who I am.
Thanks, Brooksy. All right, Sarah, you're next up.
Kia ora, everyone. My name's Sarah Carberry, and I live in New Zealand in the beautiful Marlborough Sounds. I probably started my journey when I was very young. My mother worked in a care home, and I loved going to work with her 3 mornings a week. and being with older people. From there, I had various experiences, but the main one that led to Farewell Trust was I brought my mother back from the UK. She was diagnosed with dementia and macular degeneration at age 80. I didn't want to leave her in a home there. I was moving back to New Zealand. Built her a little granny flat, purpose-built for her next to my house. And she lived until a couple of years ago in her 97th year. So that was a long journey for me, being a 24-hour carer. But she'd asked me, way back, years ago, could she die at home? She wanted to die where she was. It's a beautiful cottage, warm, right by the water. She could do as she pleased there. I took care of her all the time. We had another lovely community lady who'd come in and shower her and do that sort of thing. And I thought, yes, of course you can die here. And then I thought about, how do you do that? How does that work? Very fortunately, I came across an Australian Natural Death Care Centre lady called Zenith Virago, who's well known over here. And I did her course back in beginning of 2016. And I realized in that room, when you had to stand up and say, why are you here? I thought I was there to help my mother. And I realized, no, it was about the community. We live in quite an isolated community here. It's often boat access only. We've had no road for 3 years, all sorts of difficulties. That comes later. But I knew within 10 minutes of being in that room, this was for the community, not just for my mum. And I was very fortunate to meet the lovely Jan. Well, I knew Jan Hook. And we would walk and talk all the time about death and dying and what we would do. And that's how Farewell Trust was born 9 years ago, wondering how we could do it in the community. So it started off with just the two of us. And then we were lucky to be joined by another team member, Jenny, who is my doppelganger. People can't tell us apart. And she lives 5 minutes away from me. And she's great at funding and keeping us on track with the charitable trusts company. Then we were joined by the lovely Deb Hartley, who is a palliative care nurse, and she works with hospice. So we work alongside hospice now. We kind of do the jobs they can't do because of distance. So that was born, and then my mother died, and she died beautifully. I have to say it was the best death I ever did, and we've done quite a few. And her cottage was empty for a while, and that's when the idea came for Poroporo Aki, which in Te Reo Māori is the final farewell, or final farewell service. So Poroporo Aki was born, and we now have the doors open for assisted dying, for worn-out carers. We work with Alzheimer's Society, Cancer Society, people like that. And it's a place for people to come where they just need that space towards the end of life. That's basically it. That's how Farewell Trust was born. The other thing I should add is a year ago, we formed ELDA, which is End of Life Doula Alliance Aotearoa. And ELDA is made up of wonderful, wonderful people who are doing doula training or are doulas, and we all work together. So we all talk to each other. We have a bi-monthly speaker who will teach us about something we didn't know about. We have meetings regularly where we discuss ideas, and that's still developing. It's only our first year, but it's amazing to see how far we've come with that. So yeah, that's Farewell Trust and ELDA. That's me. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, Aditi, tell us about yourself and how you got here.
Thank you. I feel like I've been called to this soul service, and my whole life has really prepared me for the version of that work through the Center for Conscious Living and Dying here in Asheville, North Carolina. I began volunteering for hospice in my late teens, and then a series of events led me to practice and specialize in hospice and palliative medicine. And this version of the work, as I mentioned, through the center was really catalyzed by the care of one young man named Ethan Sisser, who's 36-year-old, dying of a glioblastoma. And he called in a community of strangers really to care for him, all through social media, all through interacting and relating through the platforms that exist, YouTube, Facebook, and asked for help. And a friend of mine heard the call, and we rallied around him, got him from a facility in another city to our city, our town, and then transferred him to a home setting, really because he wanted to film his dying journey, and the facility wouldn't allow that. So we had to get creative. And what I experienced in the 2 weeks that I knew him and cared for him with the help of multiple others was truly transformative. He had a dying experience that really reflected his life and his spirit and his values, and reflected the way he lived his life. And when he took his last breath, I had a deep knowing that there was something in this for me to do, to support others to create a dying experience such as that. So that's how I landed at the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, through grace and through following the breadcrumbs.
Thank you, Aditi. Well, we'll stay with you, and kind of then, if you could expand on what you saw, or what you see as the needs in your community, maybe even also how you define your community, because it's certainly not just in Asheville, and how you felt you could bring about meeting some of those needs.
Yeah. You know, I think the needs of our community in this small mountain town and the surrounding rural areas are probably not unique to our region. I think, having been in the medical model of dying for so long, and witnessing how our modern world has really created silos, and really kind of we have stressed independence and individualism and self-sufficiency and all that. And I witnessed how that didn't really serve and doesn't really serve the dying person and their families, because a dying person requires multiple layers of support. And often that support comes, if you're lucky and have friends and family that can offer unpaid caregiving support in our community, or paid caregiving, or sometimes even facility-based care, where families can't take care of their loved ones anymore because of their own livelihood. They need to raise a family, raise children, and work full time. So the caregiving needs are a real concern, and can be, I wouldn't say a burden. I think any family member that I have met, many family members, I would say, would love to offer the care that their loved one needs, but either they're not prepared, they've never been around aging and dying people, they don't have the layers of support to allow for that. So that 24/7 caregiving need was very apparent to me. And so that's one piece of what the center does support. And you want me to go into that now? Is that, or it's kind of more into programming? I can just touch on.
Go ahead. Yeah, that's okay.
So I'll speak to that. So we offer a community-supported end-of-life care home for our region. And in our state, if we have 3 people or less under one roof, we don't have to, and we don't charge for services, then we don't have to be licensed or regulated, which gives us a lot of freedom to provide the hands-on care, provide medication management, to offer holistic support for people, massage, aromatherapy, music. And honestly, just care, period. So if somebody doesn't want any of those things, just having a roof over their head, a warm place to be with 24/7 caregiving support is a value. And so that's a large part of what we're doing. And then when we talk about needs, so you have the needs of a dying person and their families, but then there's also, I would say, there are people who are death curious and and that are grieving the deaths of loved ones. And that's a community of people that we're also supporting through education and programming, and inviting people into this season of life, a season that many people in our communities aren't exposed to. I grew up going to India, and death is everywhere. The poverty, the whole spectrum of life is in plain sight, whereas in the States it's often hidden. And so offering volunteers to come in to learn these basic skills, to learn how to be present with one another, which takes some preparation. And I'm grateful for a contemplative path that allowed me to cultivate that presence. But that's what we're inviting people into by offering community supported death care. So it's for ourselves as much as it is for the people we serve.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's extraordinary. Hey, Sarah, tell us more about what you're doing in Marlborough Sounds.
Um, as Aditi said, we're about community. We often go and give talks to people, and it's amazing to watch the change in the community. When Jan and I first started this, I remember our first talk was to a rural women's group. And in the beginning, it was very much, oh no, I don't want to be with a dying person. I can't do that. And then we started to pull it out a bit. And it was, well, we're a long way from the shops. Could you go to town and pick up something? Could you pick up medication? Can you walk a dog? Can you chop firewood? Can you cut the grass? And everybody said, oh, yeah, I can do that. And I can bake cakes. And all of that started. So by trying to get the community all to do a little bit means that we're not doing it all. And it is watching the community change. I mean, one of the examples was we work with the local men's shed. I don't know if you have that in the States. The men's shed are a group of older men who've retired, and one day a week they meet and they make projects for the community. And when I approached them about making coffins, because the price of coffins is ridiculous, I approached them, and first of all, it was, oh, no, 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 because they thought if they talked about death and dying and saw a coffin, they were going to die. I then spent quite a few sessions with them, and now it's hilarious. I can ring up, I haven't done it for a while, but I could ring up and say, hey, we need one. And I'll go down to pick it up, a day or so later, and they've all tried it out for size. So they've lost their fear, and that's part of our education, is to teach people death and dying is not to be feared, but you must have community support. So we've watched the community change and grow, which has been probably one of the best things for us.
Yeah, is it true in New Zealand? I mean, as the DT said, that people tend to hide, and you certainly like confronted them head on with that and really helped them get over their fear. But how do New Zealanders face death in general?
It depends where you're living, I think, and I can only talk about the Marlborough Sounds, but we've seen the change in people, that they're much more accepting now. And, you can go somewhere and, oh, you're the death ladies. So people understand that what we're doing is not frightening. I think it's getting more and more accepted. We're seeing a huge number of doulas training, which is fabulous, so that it is changing from being less medicalized to being more at-home based. I mean, there's always going to be some that need to be in hospice or hospital and want to be, they feel safe there. But what we want to see, and what we are seeing, is people are realizing they have choices. And this is really encouraging. So we have great hope that it will continue.
Yeah. Well, do you want to say something more about, is it Porta Paraki?
Poraki. Okay, well, Poraki is the most beautiful space. As I say, it's very quiet. You can't see another house from there. It's got a beautiful deck, 2 beautiful bedrooms. We have all the equipment you could possibly need. We don't charge now, but we do ask for a koha, or we hope for a koha. Koha means a donation. And, we've had a couple of assisted deaths there, and we did get koha, more than what we would have charged. So it's a space for people to come, particularly with assisted dying, when we know when the doctors are coming. And we encourage the family to come for a few days beforehand to create some memories, to have some laughs, to shed some tears, whatever they need. And they can wander around. It's a no exit road, and there's very little traffic, so you can walk down the road. We have a therapy dog, Phoenix. He's a lovely little staffy. And he goes, and he's been with one of them when he was dying. So we're trying to create this home. We're not a care home. We're not a show home by any means, but we're a caring home. And that's where people can come and spend their last days if they want to. Or as I say, when they've had a diagnosis of a terminal illness, and they just need space and time, because time stops in the Sounds. It's very slow, or can be. And that's what people need to come to terms with end of life, I think. As I say, the other use it's got is for worn-out carers. Having been one, and am still one, I know that need to just have space and time. to just relax. Everything is there for them. We have our palliative nurse is also a masseur, so she would come and massage if they want it. One of our trustees, Jenny, is a brilliant cook, and she will do meals if needed. So we have all these extra things that can happen if people want them. And it's just their time and space to breathe.
Yeah, wow, it's beautiful. Aditi, real quick, I just wanted to ask you, does the Center for Conscious Living and Dying accept donations as well?
Yes, so we are donation based, and many people pay it forward after receiving our support. Yeah.
Yeah, all right, beautiful. Thank you. Brooksy, yeah, tell us about the needs in Pittsburgh, or again, however you define your community, and what you set about to help meet those needs.
Thank you for asking. Like Sarah and Aditi spoke to community, our need here is to help people come together and to educate them and give them a safe space to talk about dying and death and grief. We have a variety of services that we offer. We certainly offer the in-home bedside services. And I think that what we really tie together and offer are more community-based and grief-based services for the caretakers and the families, and to an extent, the people that are in their dying time. We have so many amazing death doulas in our extended area. So Pittsburgh is this really small town that's surrounded by Chapel Hill and Raleigh and Durham. And so we expand out into, you know, from the mountains from where Aditi is to the ocean. And we want people to talk about and tell their stories. We want to be able to hold space while people explore their own feelings about death and dying. And the community piece that really came forward for me 10 years ago with Zephyr and Chris's death was how the community came together. So they just came together to support Tammy and Lyle's family when Z died, and to support Chris Lukash. And that inspired me to really do my own deep healing around the grief that I had been holding since my teenage years of my father's death and my husband's death. And so we have monthly gatherings for grief circles, for death and cupcakes, community service where we talk about anything from advanced directives to storytelling. We've gathered stories and created anthologies. We have song circles where we lift up our voices for healing of our hearts to the divine. We do offer one-on-one services, hands-on healing and music, and that is our thread that goes through our community services. Movement, touch, music, to lift people up and to help them feel like there's human connection. And then we end our year with our annual death fair. And that's kind of our biggest and one of our funnest events. It's a day-long event where it's all dedicated to all kinds of services around death. Speakers on psychedelics and end of life, vendors who are showing us how to make shrouds and how to make pine boxes. We have guest speakers who are talking about afterlife care. And we're coming up on our 10th annual Death Fair revival. And that started 10 years ago, within a year after the community came together with Z and Chris. And we just really want people to feel safe to talk about death and to talk about their feelings around it.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's so much that's coming up for me, but one of the things that's really hitting is all of you are basically saying the community wants to be involved. I think typically we're afraid to ask them, but it seems as though in your case, of course, Sarah, you kind of like, I could just see you, Sarah, you probably nudged them quite a bit, but it's phenomenal. They want to help. So yeah, Wilka, tell me about the needs of what you view your community to be and how you've set about to help fulfill those needs.
Thank you. So as I mentioned, when I started coming into the space of the dying and the grieving, it was through my psychology practice and going into the homes of people who, according to the medical system, had some kind of psychological problem because they insisted that they were dying and that they knew that they were dying. So, the first thing I observed was this mixed messages we're receiving from what the dying person knows, feels, needs, and what the system is saying. And then I understood that this was a very different space, and I started to observe what happens in that space and how people are called in, and in Mexico, especially in the area where I am, there is still that community support that shows up for anything, and especially when somebody is dying. The way that it happens is that, maybe you don't have a very close relationship with your neighbors, but you see them every day. And the day you don't see them, then you start to wonder about it. And then you go over and ask what's going on and how can you help? There's that spirit of community. There's that permission that is still present for a lot of people to just step in. And so a lot of people in those spaces that I was first attending, I felt one of the first needs that I observed was, number one, this empowerment of, or acknowledgement and honoring of the truths that the people who are being affected by this change and this transformation or transition that is happening, to be validated and to be honored, right? So people knew that they were dying, and so rather than trying to fit into what the system is saying, to actually empower them to know that there's truth there that has information for us on how to hold this space. Then there was all of the people that are already doing this in their communities, right? That what I observed when I went into the communities who have less access to the systems and therefore are tending to their dying and their grieving in more traditional ways of our original peoples, to learn from them and find out how all of that was happening, what I discovered is that there are the equivalent of what we would call today death doulas, but because of the systems and colonization and all of these other things, there's a sort of shame about it and the secrecy around it, because to be close to death is dark and evil or something. And so how could we empower those who are already serving their communities became one of the needs that was evident. At the same time, in observing how, there's a certain privilege that those of us who have degrees and positions within the healthcare system can have, that I, with that quote unquote power, could then support them. And when I discovered that there's this movement of death doulas, then I figured if we can have a non-medical professional role that can validate what these people are already doing, and then we can be informed by them because they carry the wisdom more than, bringing it from an authority over there. So then that became a big part of the first organization that I founded, which was the Elizabeth Kubler-Ross Foundation in Central Mexico, which was meant as a social service and community education program to learn from the communities about what the needs are and what the strengths are, and then how do we make that bridge so that they can be more empowered to continue to serve their communities, which led to us training volunteers, both from the communities and from outside, which then revealed another level of need, which was that there were other people doing different kinds of work or feeling called to this work and not having anywhere to go or how to get trained. And so I accidentally started the first death doula school in Latin America because of that. And so now I started to train more officially, what we call life, death, and transition doulas, because we understand that that accompaniment isn't just at the end of life, and there's so much that goes on even in the space of the dying that isn't just about death. And then from there, I discovered that as I was 10 years ago, sort of in a vacuum in my community, with more access than most to information and to awareness of what's happening with this movement, that I wanted to find out who else is out there. So then from there, I started, for different reasons and different connections, started to connect with the first trained death doulas in Latin America. There were 4 of us some 10 years ago. And so the 4 of us then got together and started to brainstorm about how can we find out who else is out there working in isolation so that we can, sort of reveal what connects us and how we can support each other. And from that came the Red Latinoamericana de Acompañamiento en la Muerte y el Duelo, which is basically the Latin American network of accompaniment in dying and grieving. All the titles in Spanish are always very long, but basically it's, who else is out there working in the death space or in the grief space, and then how can we support one another, and what is going on in our countries, and what are the needs of our communities, and how can we collectively as Latin Americans share information, cross-pollinate, inspire each other, as different countries have advancements in different areas, some more in palliative care, some more in hospice care, some more in medical aid in dying. Mexico, thanks to Fundación Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, which is our organization, the first natural burial site for reforestation, of course, not counting all of the burials of our ancestors. And so how can we support one another in achieving these collective goals? And so the needs are, I think, multi-layered, and of course, there's need for education and more information, and we do that too. So all of the different organizations have a component of education, community education. And then from there, for me, the death awareness tour idea came because anywhere that I go to do any kind of service, I try to do community outreach and connect with who is there and what are their needs and how can we support each other. So from there, this new project has ensued. I think I've been doing these tours consciously or unconsciously since 2019, of finding out what are the cultural specifics of the dying and the grieving of a particular community, and then sort of informing that to be able to make those bridges of support and what else can they need. And so something that I've discovered in the last 2 years, I think, going in different places around the world, is that there is this death awareness that's awakening globally. I mean, and I don't want to generalize, but wherever I go, there's already a few people who are supporting each other, right? Whatever kind of marginalized community that has special needs that are not being addressed by the systems, out of that naturally is born this, let's then support each other. Let's then find a way of how do we take care of our dying and our grieving. And so when I find those communities, then I also offer, and I have to say, all of this work that I'm mentioning is all pro bono, and somehow life provides and it works. We don't accept donations, and we don't try to work with money at all. And it is a very beautiful reciprocal relationship. I think that's also maybe something that is still more alive in Latin America, but I forgot what I was going to say. Oh yes, that these communities of caring for their own dying and their own grieving are naturally emergent. And I feel that this is because as humans, it is our impulse to want to accompany one another, to want to learn from each other. And there's less of the limitations that we have as we have progressed and gotten more civilized and more technologicalized and more specialized. So I think the approach for me has been to learn from what is already emerging and then find ways in which to support, encourage, and empower. Mhm.
Yeah, wow, thank you. Certainly, what's coming across is nobody in this field gets rich, and nobody in this field gets into it in order to make money. It's a labor of love, clearly. You know what strikes me too, and I only say Aditi, you did call Asheville a small mountain town. So Aditi, Sarah, and Brooksy really work in smaller communities. Wilka, you obviously are working across a broad geography, which, sometimes we tend to say Latin America, and people here in the US go, oh, it's a monolith, when it clearly is not. And so it strikes me that you're doing a lot of connecting, and everybody else can do that within the community. And I'm wondering what you're thinking about. Okay, so it's the same, but you're coordinating and you're connecting. Do you feel you've got more resources maybe than what some of the smaller communities might have, and that's a good thing? Or how do you view that sort of distinction?
Wow, that's a great question. I don't know that there's more necessarily, and I think we could probably look at the micro in the smaller communities and the macro, and there's a parallel, right? Every death and every situation of loss and grief exists and happens within a broader context, and it impacts the broader context, whether it's individual or collective. The other thing that we're connecting with a lot is community grief, right? So different communities have particular griefs that they are navigating. Like, for example, right now in Puerto Rico, even when those hurricanes that happened that really devastated the island happened in 2017, that grief is still very present, and the recovery from all of the loss is still very evident. Like, a lot of it has not been, there hasn't been those kinds of resources to support the community grief that is happening, right? So we can look at it as from individual within one community of people, but we can also look at it as the whole community as the individual of a bigger global collective community, right? So what I find that perhaps there are two things that I would say in terms of the non-monolithical Latin America is that one thing I do find is that in general, and again, I can't generalize, but there is a sense of belonging in community that is more palpable, that there's less of that individuality, even when there is some of it. And that is a strength, and that is an incredible resource. The other thing that I notice is that there is a recognition of the reciprocity of any interaction. So it is not transactional in nature, and therefore there's always a win-win that feels more palpable, perhaps. And then there is a certain creativity and innovation that comes from need, right? That when there are no resources and when there is no support from those with like the current resource currency, which is more like economical or financial, there are other things that happen. And we see a lot more of that, at least in the communities that I work in, that I think makes some of the difference. And I will tell you something else that it's moved me deeply as I am going into the communities in Puerto Rico, in different parts of the island, is how people who have been neglected by the systems are so incredibly grateful and recognize the value of the community outreach that we can offer. And that approach of saying, we are coming to learn from you, also is something that empowers people in a way that maybe other kinds of support might not, because you can receive, I mean, I'm not saying it's not good to receive financial support, but like maybe there's not that human interaction in those kinds of resources than that there is when people are going to be with people and to connect and to do it from that very human space. So I don't know if I answered the question, but that's what it inspired.
Yeah, yeah, well, yeah, and then yeah, for Brooksy, Sarah, and Aditi, I mean, what do you think about working in this smaller community? And you know what the resources are that you have. One thing that comes up for me too, listening to Wilka, is I don't know if you planned this, but you certainly did, and this took years, right? You first with the Kubler-Ross, you were educating people about death, and then you saw a need to educate the doulas, and then you saw a need to start connecting them together. And you're going on your third annual conference, right? This year. Yeah, and then now you're on a road trip. So, you know, it sort of sounds like you planned this like amazingly well. But I mean, for the rest of you, yeah, working in a small community, I guess part of this for me is, can you take some of what you've learned and expand it out? Because clearly one of the things we were hoping to do here is to inspire other folks to go, wow, you know, we can do this, and we can do it not on our own. But Aditi, Sarah, and Brooksy, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I'd love to add how we took it out of our community. 6 years ago, we put a call out to storytellers to tell their stories about death and dying. And we had storytellers from all over the United States send their stories in, and we had several from upstate New York. And so after the first anthology was published, they invited us to come up, and their local artist, Diane Fine, created a collaboration, and she held an art show where people created art, and the local hospice supported us, and we took Heart to Heart and we took it up to New York. So we had this beautiful collaboration of storytellers and artists and music, and we collaborated with, you know, somebody in a total different state. And that's, you know, that's how it moves out from our little town in North Carolina, is through these other creative endeavors and people wanting to talk about and wanting to get together and share stories and be in the space of death, dying, and grief.
Yeah, wow, that's excellent. Aditi.
Yeah, I'm really appreciating the common thread of collaboration and creativity. I think we're all experiencing that. And I love what you said, Wilka, about death isn't in isolation. There is a ripple effect, and I mentioned that young man, Ethan Sisser, who I had the honor of supporting, and a documentary was made about his care, about community-supported death care, called The Last Ecstatic Days. And that film, so Brooks is speaking to storytelling and media and art as a tool to really help us remember these parts of our being and our way of relating to one another in life and death, I think is just so powerful. So that film alone has really connected us to the global community. I think that's how I met you, Sarah, I believe, or somehow we connected, Sarah, in New Zealand. And it's just been so beautiful. It's been shown in Tanzania, and Wilka's been using it as a tool. So it's a really, I think what we're doing, I often talk about the microcosm and the macrocosm, and that's been a beautiful surprise. I don't think I really realized it in the medical system because things are so transactional and we're busy. And I worked in a 26-bed inpatient facility, hospice house. So it was just a different climate culture. And in this community-supported model, a way of being in life and death, it's just incredible to witness how death informs how we live and how we relate to one another. And I'm so in awe of the collective, how it manifests. It shows itself. You know, somebody will be processing something that's independent of another, you think, and we're all in the same kind of, it's reflecting what's happening out on a global scale too. So I think the inner work, it starts with what I feel is it starts within, and then that ripples out to the larger community. And we're learning skills along the way that are informing our practice. And what I really appreciate about this journey is that we get to be creative. We get to look at the needs and assess them and respond, which is essentially what it sounds like we're all doing in our communities. And it's still evolving and emerging. So we also have a death doula training program. Education is quite a large pillar, offering programming of all sorts for people in the community that are curious about death, that want to start engaging in the conversations. There's all these creative ways in the States, I guess globally too, around death cafes, death over dinner, ways to bring people together to engage in these conversations. And then we are also, Rilke, doing a tour called the We Are Remembering Tour. We're going to be in the Berkshires at Racebrook Lodge in April. And so there's another creative way to bring people together and to celebrate life, but also to have these deep reflections, reflecting time on life, death, and grief. So that's what I'll add.
Sarah, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I would. We're very lucky in Aotearoa, New Zealand. It's a small country. We've only got, I think, 5 million people. So it's not too bad. But what we've started seeing happening a lot, or I'm finding, is that we are talking to each other more in different areas, a lot through Elder. Elder are a marvelous group to have. And we found even in the last few weeks, we've been approached by people from overseas who are hearing what we're doing here. We've got a lovely woman coming who won a fellowship. She's an American. She's traveling the world looking at different ways of death in different communities. So she's doing her research. So we've invited her to stay at Poraporaaki so she can see and hear and meet the team and see how we work. We've got Kath Mannix coming for a couple of days. So we've got all these people. We've got a researcher, very well-known researcher for the Ministry of Health who's coming to stay to do some work, collaboration work. And it's that sort of thing, because we're now starting to talk to each other, meet each other. We work with a beautiful palliative care service down from Timaru, lovely doctors. So they're all starting to realise that there is a place for doulas, there's a place for death in the community, and the doors are opening left, right and centre. It's come as quite a shock because I wasn't expecting it. I don't think the others were either. But these people are wanting to share information, and that's what it's about. We're finding out what they're doing, they're finding out what we're doing, and we can talk about ideas, which is incredibly valuable. I mean, we're still in early stages of all of this, but it's very interesting to see how our country and overseas as well are recognising that being in the community is incredibly valuable. So death is now we're seeing it becoming less medicalised and more about options, choices. And that's really reassuring. Yeah, we just hope that it continues. And I think it will, because it seems to be worldwide, not just in our little spot. So I thank everybody for everything they're doing, because it helps all of us. You know, even if we're not involved in your community, we learn from what we're seeing. I mean, I watched the last Ecstatic Days. I think I've seen it 3 times now. And I desperately want to get it here to show. Maybe Elder will do that. It's such a fantastic film, and it shows us how it is. So keep it up. Somebody make another film.
Okay. You find the money. So what's coming across too is, as you all help people come to terms with death, you're creating a kinder, gentler set of folks, you know, that really seem to appreciate life more, and like we said at the outset, want to help. So I absolutely love it. So in talking about death, you're actually helping people, Dee Dee, as you said, you know, learn to live better lives. Absolutely marvelous. Okay, let's talk about some of the challenges. You know, Aditi, you started out by saying that to get around the hospice and regulation, state regulation rules, you basically are, like I said, you're donation based. You stayed under three or less people that you serve at a time, right? At a time. So yeah, what other challenges have you faced in wanting to do this work?
You know, I think we've been building the bridge as we cross it, kind of, if you know that metaphor. because we're in sort of this creative, responsive, allowing space, which isn't very linear and planned out. And so that's been a challenge as we grow this community. The interest has been so immense and surprising to me in engaging in this type of community. So we've just had to catch up, and we're finally at a place, year 3, where we're grounding and able to slow down enough to allow for the time and space that's needed to have thoughtful planning. And there's just so much excitement. I don't know if you all have experienced this in your communities, but there's a lot of energy and momentum that we've felt in the last 3 years. And since I did my death doula training in 2018, the number of doula students has, I think, tripled, quadrupled. So there is an interest, as Wilka spoke to, this emergence. And so feeling all that energy and channeling it has been a dance. And I feel like we're finally at a place where we can slow down. So that's been one. I think we offer the in-home services, but we also are going out into the community and offering education and guidance. We have a guidance and support team. And when you have a physical space, there are the practical matters of finances and, how do you keep the doors open? So that's been I wouldn't say a challenge. We've kind of embraced it as a part of the process. And I think that's helped us not feel it as a challenge, but as a reality that we have to look at. Fundraising, if you will. And then community, to me, it's such it's a beautiful intention to be in community, but what that involves is also a lot of humans, a lot of opinions, a lot of personalities. And I can say it with lightness, but there are challenges in that if we're not all fully aligned and clear about our purpose and clear about how we communicate and how we organize. And so I think that's something we're still learning and growing into, but have such a beautiful group of people to explore that with and to grow in that together. So.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'm reminded too, Sarah, when you said, death is becoming less medicalized, which I think is everybody's goal on this call. Did any of you find the medical establishment? Oh no, Wilka, you shared a story one time. You went up, I'm going to say you went up against the medical establishment to help them understand this role. You had the traditional death midwifery or whatever you called it and doula role, but you wanted to bring it back. So what was that like for you to I'm picturing you in the room of white coats talking to all these doctors, but what was that like?
So I think you may be referring to, that in Mexico, the birthing role of the midwife is considered and very highly respected as a legal profession, like a recognized profession. And there's great gaps in that there's no conversation or education around death or grief. And that we were invited into that space to develop some kind of program of death awareness in the spaces of birthing and family planning and all of these kinds of things. Maybe that's what you're referring to.
There was a webinar you did with, oh my gosh, your partner from Ecuador.
Uh-huh.
And you talked about having to help your medical establishment in Mexico understand how important this was. And it was to support their work. It wasn't, it wasn't in competition with what they were doing.
Right. So anyway, yes, we have that challenge of, and what's happening now, that the doors are opening and the space where they are opening is in medical schools. So that's an exciting development because, this collective assumption that we fear the unknown is specifically manifest within the systems for anything that is outside the systems, right? So the challenge of inviting this conversation within the system was a lot more, it was a lot more before, and there was a lot more resistance about what is not known. And a big part of the work that I think we've been doing collectively, even if we didn't, know each other, we've been doing this work together. And there's more awareness, there's more embracing, maybe not, all around, but more people are starting to open doors, or more people are more in touch with what are the needs that require this kind of attention that is doesn't take anything away from the systems that are already in place. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of put you on the spot there.
Well, I guess
Brooksy,
the other thing I could say about that is that, you know, because there's several stories that what you're remembering reminds me of, and I'm wondering if it's not also referring to dealing with the funeral industry, because that's one big thing that we did in Mexico, which actually kind of happened quite interestingly, because we first were looking at the laws, and, you know, if we look from the top down and from what it is and not thinking beyond what it is to what's possible, we're going to get really bummed out really fast, right? Because, you know, one would assume that socially, culturally, and politically, there are many things that we want and need that currently there's no room for them. But as I was doing one of these tours of awareness in regards to, you know, the amazing solution that green burial can be, and conservation burial and all of these things, it was actually the funeral industry who was most interested, which was really surprising. I wasn't talking badly about them, but I was saying that there's this structure that was put in place that now benefits the industry, and that, you know, we need to start raising our voices and speaking to what our rights are and what our wishes are, so that we can start to, you know, encourage a change. And the most impactful response that I got from all that noise I made was actually the funeral industry coming to me to say, okay, how can we collaborate? And this is how we can have green burial in Mexico, not all parts of Mexico, but we're starting to have more openness to it because of all of the other benefits that nobody thinks about. That is not just about tending to, you know, after death care, but it's also social, and it's also cultural, and it's also ecological. So, yeah. Thank you.
yeah, great. Thank you. Aditi, you wanted to say something?
I just wanted to clarify that we are in deep collaboration with our hospice programs locally, and that is the model. So community-supported death care, I think, is a beautiful supplement to the existing model of hospice care in the US, which has come a long way since the 70s, and it's such a beautiful resource. So I just wanted to name that all my colleagues and the nurses that come to the center, so the hospice programs come into the home, the Omega style home. I didn't even talk about that, but there are models like ours all over the country, and they formed a network called the Omega Home Network. So if you're in the US, you can look that up and see homes that are in operation and development. So hospice comes into these homes and provides all the medical care. So we're really providing the non-medical support. And the nurses that come often are so grateful, and so they find their own inner peace when they come to the center, because it's just a beautiful approach to death and dying. And so we're very collaborative in our local community.
Can I just
Yeah, so
add,
another,
sorry, Chris.
I was just
gonna
saying
say,
yeah, go ahead. I was going to ask you guys if you want, Brooksy and Sarah, if you had anything to add.
yeah, I just, total agreement with Aditi. We're very lucky with our hospice. We work with them. We've been working with them for nearly 9 years now. And that's what gives us the medical backup when we need it. And they refer rahiri. We use the word rahiri rather than patient. Rahiri is, again, another Maori word for somebody held in high esteem. So rather than patient or client, which infers money, which we don't do, we use rahiri, and even hospice is starting to use it now. But what I would say is the hospice we've got are incredible. They're absolutely brilliant. And knowing that we can ring them at any time, if we're with somebody who's dying and there's a problem, they're on the phone 24/7. So that backup gives us security, because we're not medically trained, except Deb. It just means if we didn't have them, I don't know that we would do as well as we do, because it gives us that security. There's somebody medically trained at the end of the phone if we're having a problem. So yeah, we're very lucky with our hospice.
Yeah. Brooksy, anything to add?
Oh, well, our two challenges here are, I think what Aditi spoke to was that there's not enough time or in a day or days in a week or, weeks in a month to provide the containers, that the excitement around here of people wanting to grieve together in community that we can hold. And then the other challenge for us is our green burial sanctuary at the borough. We don't pre-sell. And so when someone calls us because a beloved has died, getting in there and preparing the ground is a challenge sometimes, because it's myself and two other women that tend to the land, and we do all the digging and we do all the preparation. So sometimes that's a challenge for us. And the funeral homes around here are very supportive for us. Some don't even know what green burial is, and they are so willing to learn and get in there with us. So I really appreciate the funeral homes in the area.
Yeah, so a lot of work doing the coordinating and helping them understand. That's really great. Yeah, and another thing that's coming through is that when you're working, we said death care and community, but basically you're working with those who are dying, with their family members, with the other carers, with after death care. So it's like, yeah, it's quite the gamut, right? All right, I think we're ready to open it up for questions. I just yeah, let's open it up for questions to see what folks would like to know. I'm, like I said, please raise your hand. I'm also going to open the chat back up in case anybody wants to write in the chat, and I appreciate you holding space for everyone here and not writing in the chat. Yeah, and what questions do you have?
May I ask a question without raising a hand?
Yeah, please do.
I cannot find how to raise my hand. I can raise it physically. Okay, I am from Germany. I am not a German. I come from Latvia, which is a tiny little country by the Baltic Sea with really nice old healing traditions. But life brought me to Germany, and I am here now. I am a care worker in Germany, although my first education is I have a master's degree in education and in transformative education. And Germans are very practical people. They look at the dying person like it's a piece of meat. It needs to be washed, fed if needed, and then just let alone and let the life take its toll, And we have just now, me and my close friends who are of the same opinion that I am, that something has to be changed. We have just registered the Meta Death Institute in order to promote the ideas that all of you were talking about this evening. I was just listening to you and I was just, oh my God, this is something that we really need here in this country, and I have a question, because we are just now registered a new organization, with like professional people. Where do we start? How do we create these programs, educational programs for death doulas? There's no such thing in Germany as a 24/7 death doula in Germany, people really need it. I work as a death doula 24/7, and people call me even from Italy. I've been to Italy, to the Netherlands, to other countries, not in Germany, yet, but, and it's such a fantastic experience when I tell people, no, you're not going to the hospital, please, no. I call the family and children come and spouses are there, and they are in their own homes, and the fantastic view from the bedroom window with a beautiful garden for the soul, to fly. And in Germany, I can't do it. We have to start from the first step, from educating the public, from educating death doulas. where do we start? How do we start? You know, I was listening to you and I was like, how can we make a project together? You know, Adith, Seti, you made me cry, you know, and Brooksy and all of you basically. But can we somehow come together and, I don't know, maybe do some fundraising and create something in Germany? I don't. Okay, that's my
So,
question.
yeah, thank you. Who would like to answer that?
Well, we'd love to bring a death fair to Germany. Email me. We'll figure it out.
How can I contact you? Is there like a one website or I don't know?
Everybody will give their contact information, and I'll definitely put it in the email you're going to get with the
Okay,
recording.
thank you
And
so much.
you can
Yeah.
also, Brooksy, whomever can also put it in the chat right now too. So anyway, Wilka, you were going to say something.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that the first step is to really be clear about what is the current relationship to, which is something that seems very evident from what you shared. To understand the cosmovision that is currently dominating the experience, and then to understand where that comes from, how that came to be, is part of how we can begin to invite evolution from where it came to where it can go, right?
Mhm.
So the approach is not to go at them and to tell them how to do it. That isn't how they're doing it, but rather to observe where there's room for evolution in what already exists, right? There are some people who recognize that there are needs, and to hear from them. And so for me, it's always they're going to be our guides in what we can do for them and how we can achieve that for them. So I find that spaces of conversation, connecting with those who are already speaking up about how things are not serving, is the first step. And then from there, opening up bigger spaces of conversation so that more people can discover that there are other options, so that the things could be different, not because we're telling them what their options are, but because they're discovering what the current options are not meeting, right? So when the community or the members of the community themselves tap into the fact that what they have available isn't meeting something, that there is a need that needs to be met, then from there you can start to identify what is the next step, right? Because, you know, for example, training doulas is not something that really can serve until people are aware of the fact that doulas have a value and a benefit for the community, right? So how do we begin to awaken that awareness in people that they want that and they will support that in their community? And
Yeah,
then,
that's
you know,
yeah. Yeah, thank you so much.
Aditi, did you have something you wanted to add?
I just wanted to say this is how seeds are planted. And so I'm grateful for your comments and your sharing. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Ileana, you have a question?
Hi, everyone. I'm Eliana. I'm from Florida. I am Wilka. I have been following you. Love the way you speak Spanish, and I have to move to Mexico just to grab that accent. But the reason why I raised my hand was because, first of all, to say thank you to this wonderful group of people. Thanks for, speaking out and making this an important part of life. Being Hispanic, I realized we don't talk about death. I am trying to make awareness here in Jacksonville, Florida. Wilka, I tried to book airline tickets to Puerto Rico because I've been to Puerto Rico, but they were too expensive, so I couldn't go. If you're ever in Florida, let me know. North Carolina, I love North Carolina everywhere. So yeah, I'm just putting myself out there. I'm again Hispanic, Florida, bringing awareness to the Hispanic community most of all. And thank you again.
That was great, Ileana. Thank you.
And I'll be in
Hey,
Jacksonville in June to see my new niece or nephew. So I'd love to connect.
Jill, you had a question you put in the chat about rituals. Do you want to go ahead and ask it on camera?
Yeah, the thing that just is curious to me is, you know, I'm in the States and I see how deaths are here, but I know some cultures are more open about death and it's more celebratory. I did the Day of the Dead in Mexico this last year, and you know, the feeling around death is so different. So just, is there any specific, I'm just curious about rituals that people may have around death and dying from the people in the other countries. And I don't know if that's too broad of a question.
Sarah, you want to go ahead and start?
For us doing rituals, we have formed our own rituals, and it does depend on the person and what their beliefs are, and we fit in with that. I will say that Maori in New Zealand do death incredibly well. We have a lot to learn from them. They do a tangihanga. It is beautifully done, and they celebrate it. And from what I understand, it's usually a 3-day ritual, and the body is on the marae, and they are not left alone. And it's the time for the people to come together and talk about who they were, what they knew, to grieve. Lots of tears are shed, some laughter too, lots of good kai food. It's hard to describe, and to be fair, I have not actually been to one, but I'm hoping to get invited to one at some point. Their rituals are very different to, as we say, Pākehā or New Zealanders, other New Zealanders. And we would really love to learn more about what they do. They grieve really well, and we don't. So we're trying to learn from them.
Thank you.
Great. So Susan just put it that there's a great series on Netflix called The Casketeers that shows some of the Maori approaches to death. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, Wilka.
Yeah, I'd like to add that one of the things that all of this work that we're doing with death awareness, or with, you know, the death doula movement, or however we want to call it, is that as we engage with our natural processes of grieving and dying, and as we bring that back to the community, there is an innate impulse, human impulse, one for, you know, compassion and accompaniment, but another for ritualizing. You know, as humans, as a species, as relational beings, we have that in us of how we want, or how we need to pause and mark transitions throughout life. And that, you know, I would say that rather than looking to other cultures and how other people are doing them, to cultivate our capacity to connect with what impulses are born in me and in my community for what we need to move through transition, or to mark the, you know, the change after a death, or those kinds of things. And that to trust that nature, because it is born of us. Like, when we don't have any point of reference of what should be done, things emerge. And to be able to honor that and follow that is the best way, right? As was just mentioned, it depends on the individual and the individual cosmovision and culture of that person and their circle of care, right? So, you know, we wouldn't bring something external or foreign, but rather observe what is the needs that are emerging and then respond to that.
That's beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I was going to ask Aditi and Brooksy, because, you know, we do have different rituals here in the States, as you would know, Jill, but I see we're following up with questions. So let's go to Pamela.
Yeah, thank you. I don't have so much of a question as I have maybe a little bit different perspective. And I'm currently involved in this, actually a year-long course, so to speak, called Year to Live. And it's based on a book by Stephen Levine. And I just want to throw that out there because I think that is really a very well, the book and the course are really an important thing for doulas and training for people that want to work with people who are entering that last phase of their life. And it really has certainly shifted my perspective of being right next to death all the time. Anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there for people who may not have heard of that before. Thank you.
Thank you. Rosalind.
You're muted, Rosalind.
Mute. Thank you. I wondered if anyone had experience with pre-death celebration. I had a friend who had a green burial recently, and he had Parkinson's, and a year before his death, he invited all of us and did a living funeral. And it came to me 3 years ago when a young girl who was involved with my children had an unintentional overdose. And we threw something, a funeral for her that was in keeping with her style. There was an artist and a hip hop musician, and Mellow Mushroom came and brought all the pizzas and where she worked. Somebody did a mural on the back of our local pizza shop for her. And I remember sitting there, and I'm not foreign to death. I was a hospice nurse for 28 years. So, but I can remember that feeling of like, oh my God, if Brooke could have experienced the love, the appreciation, the connection, and the power of how she touched the lives of human beings. And I feel like that for every one of us. And so I've recently been talking about, excuse me, how to come and start to create living celebrations of life. You know, now all the funerals we talk about is celebration of life, but a living celebration of life where maybe pre-death we can begin for people to experience. And how would we exit knowing that love and that connection and that awareness of how we've impacted life?
That's lovely. And anybody want to comment on that?
Well, Rosalind, that's beautiful. And I think it is being done. You know, we do it here in our community. And what I'm led to say is I think it starts with exactly what you said, and everybody just reaching out to the people they love and telling them that they love them. So we don't have to wait for anything. Open the heart now and, you know, tell people how much you care.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Sandra, I think Sandra put a question in the chat about how, I can't remember the exact question, but it speaks to this. Like, what would it be like if we are seen, heard, and loved and know that we're loved in our living days before we die? I think that could change our whole experience of life itself. So I appreciate that, Rosalind. And there's a filmmaker that is working on a film and reached out to us looking for people who are doing living funerals. And I haven't encountered anyone yet, but if you know of anyone, let me know, and I'll guide you to the next filmmaker.
Yeah, I think we're gonna, we have an event center and we're getting ready to pull that together. So maybe you and I can dialogue at some point.
Thanks.
Excellent. Kenneth.
Hi, my name is Kenny, and I'm here in Asheville, and I've become aware of this whole thing by my association to Aditi, who was really important. Her presence was important for me and for my wife, who died, my wife and partner of many, many years, who died a year and a half ago, last June. There's so much here that I'm so full of questions and so full of excitement about. It's amazing and wonderful to see you all here and to hear what you're saying, and to hear that there is a thrust and an initiative to bring this whole subject into community. The way I became associated with it and became aware of it was the way that is kind of available to the normal situation, which is kind of through the medical portal. And this is how we can somehow attach ourselves and become aware of the possibilities in death, and it is through a rather obscure hidden door. And by happenstance often, there was a wonderful hospice worker in the hospital where Gina was, and Gina was suffering very, very greatly in those days in death. And she's this marvelously spiritual person. We've been spiritual all our lives, and full of confidence and love of God and love of spirit. And when the pain came and when the difficulty came, it became a confusing and difficult thing for her. And this hospice guy, who used to be a neurosurgeon, said that there's this woman who used to be the director of hospice for the mission hospital here. Her name is Aditi, and she's forming this thing. And Aditi came over and was present with Gina. And therein is there's the thing. Her presence was transformative. And that's what I think we're talking about, is this the spiritual presence that needs to be brought into the fore at this time, of aging and dying and death and grief. And it needs to have a new kind of portal. It needs to have a more accessible portal, a portal that is in the community. The community should be holding. The community holds death. The community should experience every single death. I mean, the community is like a river that receives the tears of the dying and the parting. And it should be, I'm talking about from a very idealist. I get so excited about the ideal, and I'm kind of frustrated, and I shouldn't be, I feel like I'm intruding on all the lovely things that are happening. And I'm saying, why is the presence of this service and these loving people that are represented here, and these really wildly talented and intuitive people that are dedicated to helping us, who are old and who are dying and who are alone and who are wondering and full of confusion and fear, that there are you people that are there and want to be with us, is wonderful. And why isn't there a church? Why isn't there a community presence? Why isn't there a brick and mortar building where everyone knows that this is the center for conscious living and dying? I mean, here in Asheville, Aditi has this wonderful place, but it's remote. It takes 25 minutes to a half hour to get there. You need to find it. There's occasional things you can get to do over there, and then I know that I think Wilka was talking about that her center is remote and lovely, and there's nobody near. And I'm excited. I'm desirous of a center that's next door. That's every night when the fear comes up, And the fear says, I'm finally going to address the fact that I'm dying. And I understand every night there's a group that's meeting there. Every night there's a choir that sings there. Every night, or there's dancing that happens. And all the wonderful activities that you guys are talking about should be happening every day in a prominent institution that is present in our community. And how do we find a kind of stable financing? How do you find the resources to put this on a powerful community presence that is, available to everybody?
Yeah, Ken, thank you so much for sharing. That is beautiful. I have the really good fortune of talking to a lot of death doulas, hospice physicians, hospice nurses, hospice social workers, and I find everybody to be just as you were talking, so embracing, so loving, so calm, basically. And yes, I'm sure there are a lot of answers to your questions, a lot more questions to your question, but it starts. You have 4 examples of 4 women who just, like I said in the beginning, vision, drive, passion, and yeah. So it's a very tough question as well. Sandra, you had your hand up. Did you want to ask a question? We can take one more question. Well, actually, we're over time. Is it okay if we take one more question? Sandra, if you want to come back.
Yes,
There you are.
can you hear me? Okay, great.
Yes.
I just wanted to thank everybody for this panel discussion. I have been a birth doula for a while and a newborn nanny, and I've always known that it was a calling for me to work with death. And so now I'm doing it. I'm taking and to see people from all the avenues that I am connecting with, and the common conversation is just heartfelt for me. I'm currently taking the Conscious Dying, Befriending Death and Doula class. I'm taking Catherine's class that's through Heart to Heart on Sunday. I'm so grateful to see everyone. I've been to Deathcare multiple times. This is just really, I just can't even express how important this conversation is, and how grateful I am that not only are we here as a group having this conversation, but each one of us are going out into our communities, to our families, and we're having this conversation as well. And it gives people opportunity to embrace the life cycle, the end of the life cycle. And we celebrate birth, and then we hide death. And to give the opportunity to celebrate and to give death ritual and ceremony and honor is just, yeah, my heart just is really large right now. I really appreciate it. Thank you for this session. It was really fabulous.
Thank you, Sandra. Is it somebody put in the chat that just to be, on a Zoom with 100 death workers, I'll say, is just filling her heart. So yeah, I think you speak for a lot of folks. How about Aditi, Sarah, Brooksy, Wilka? Do you want to just say a closing word or two in terms of a key takeaway you'd like folks to take?
May you be inspired and empowered to follow your heart.
That's great. Sarah?
I would like to finish with our sort of motto, which is, we can't cure it, we can't fix it, we can't change it, but we're here and we care. And that's sort of the principle we work by.
Beautiful. Brooksy?
Human connection, open your hearts. It's an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you for coming. Thank you, Chris, for making this happen.
Yeah, thank you. Wilka, you get the final word.
I'll just say thank you. A lot has been said and a lot has been received. A lot of seeds have been planted. So thank you for being able to share this time together.
Yeah, I'll say special, Ken, thank you again for sharing your story. Really, really appreciate it. All right, well, this has been so lovely. I hate to say goodbye, but hopefully you forged some new connections. I see some of that going on in the chat. So wish you all a great rest of your day. And bye for now.
Thank you.
Thank you all for your service.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.